Hello YouTube, CSO here and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to explain how to properly set up your subwoofer. This isn't just another subwoofer video. I actually could not find another one that explains how to properly set levels, and believe me, it's important to know how to set them so they blend in seamlessly with your speakers and the LFE being a reference level. Whether you have one subwoofer or four, correctly setting the gain, crossover and phase will ensure your bass is balanced and that it's at the correct volume. Proper subwoofer integration isn't about guesswork. Setting the gain to the 12 o'clock position is definitely not the correct way to do it. Adjusting the gain knob even a tiny bit can throw off the subwoofer's level big time. I will go over the core concepts to hands-on calibration using a handheld SPL meter, test tones, room EQ wizard, and using a UMIC-1 mic. We will focus on level matching, phase, and the crossover settings. I will also explain some of the misunderstood things that I see on social media, Reddit, and even on YouTube. I won't cover DSP, parametric EQ, acoustic treatments, or room optimization. There are multiple videos on YouTube for those topics. Some of the videos and other guides do not get one or two things right, like the crossover settings. By the way, I have also made a Google document about this guide and it's linked down below. First, let's clarify what the subwoofer plays. Your subwoofer plays two types of content: redirected bass from the speakers that are set to small and the LFE channel. Redirected bass is handled through the speaker's crossover setting. So the number one thing to do is to level mesh speakers and subwoofers for a seamless integration. When we level mesh speakers and the subwoofers, we do that for the redirected bass. The LFE channel is a dedicated bass channel found in movie soundtracks, mixed 10 dB louder by design. You set up one of these using the methods that I will talk about. The other one falls into place automatically. To begin the calibration, we need to correctly configure the subwoofer and the receiver. Usually, there are at least 2 or 3 dials on the back of the subwoofer. Set the crossover to the highest setting by turning the dial all the way to the right. Usually, it's marked with a number that is 120 Hz or higher. Sometimes it just says LFE. Set the phase to 0 for now and the gain well below the midpoint. In the receiver, set the speakers to small and lower the subwoofer trim to -7 dB. This gives the receiver subwoofer output extra headroom, preventing clipping, and keeps the signal clean and distortion free at loud bass peaks. We will compensate for the weak bass using the subwoofer's gain knob. Then set the LPF for LFE to 120 Hz. Please do not lower this to match the speaker crossover. These two settings are independent and have nothing to do with each other. To measure, you can either use a handheld SPL meter from Amazon or buy a calibrated UMIC-1 mic. You can buy this from the same website and it does cost more, but there are so many things you can do with it. I highly recommend getting one if you are semi-serious about making your system sound better. When using these tools, make sure you hold them at the main listening position and at ear level. You will need someone to help you turn the gain while you hold the microphone and watch the screen. The SPL meter should be set to C rating and switch to slow or S mode. Now we need to play the test noise. You have several options for this too, but there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The easiest way to play the pink noise is to use the receiver's built-in test tone. But you can only use this if you have not run any calibration on the system. Using the internal test tone will defeat the calibration and won't reflect how the system will sound once the calibration is back on. To use this, go into the receiver settings and find trim or levels. It will play a loud pink noise automatically while the receiver is locked to 0 on the relative volume scale. If the volume is low for some reason and you can change it, then set it to 0, then measure the speakers. You can level match all speakers, but we are only going to focus on the subwoofer. Again, The subwoofer's trim level needs to be set to -7 dB regardless of where all the other speaker trim levels are set to. Once all speaker levels are matched at 75 dB, we are ready to adjust the gain on the subwoofer. Turn the subwoofer's gain dial until the meter reads 75 dB. The receiver sends the subwoofer a test tone that is 10 dB lower, which is why we match the speakers and the sub at 75 dB. This ensures the redirected bass playing at the same level as the speakers. The LFE channel will play louder, but the AVR handles that automatically. Another option would be to download the Dolby Atmos test tone file, which I will also link down below. You can play this file on your TV, media player, or through VLC on your computer. If the sound is coming out of the wrong speakers, you need to make sure the audio pass-through is turned on. This settings is called HDMI pass-through in VLC, and usually you need to change the TV or media player from PCM audio to bitstream. Ultimately, try to connect your device straight to the receiver and not through the TV. Play the video and the pink noise will play on the left speaker first. Adjust the volume until you see 75 dB on the SPL meter. The video will then play the pink noise for the right speaker and the center speaker and eventually for the subwoofer. Very important, using this method for calibration, you will need to set the subwoofer to 85 dB, not 75. The last option would be using Room EQ Wizard, the SPL meter, or better yet, the UMIC 1 mic. Once you install REW, make sure you also download the calibration file for the UMIC 1 mic. There is a label on the microphone that you can enter on the website and download the file. Save it and use a 90-degree calibration file. In REW, go to Preferences, Sound Card, and load the file for the UMIC 1 mic on the right side. For output, make sure the receiver is selected. Do not leave it on default. Obviously, you need to have your laptop or computer hooked up to the receiver with an HDMI cable and change the input on the receiver so you can see the screen. On Windows, make sure you change the playback device to the receiver. If you only see a couple of speakers under the output, change the output to EXCL receiver. Then all speakers should show up, including LFE. In REW, open the SPL meter on the top toolbar and don't forget to set it to C weight and slow. If numbers are grayed out, hit the record button on the bottom right. Open generator, select noise, then pink random. Here we are going to use the sub calibration and speaker calibration. You will see a number in the middle, which I believe is set to -12 dBFS by default. On the bottom right, select the speaker, in this case either left, right, or LFE, then hit play. We are going to start by selecting speaker cal and left speaker. Hit play and wait a few seconds while the meter settles. Raise the volume on the receiver until you see 75 dB. Once you see the 75 dB, you can stop the noise. Then select sub cal and LFE for output. Since we did not change the pink noise level and left it at -12 dBFS, we are going to set the gain 10 dB higher. Once you see the SPL meter around 85 dB, you can stop the noise. The number might fluctuate a little, and that is fine. You probably won't be able to get it right on the exact number. Another way to do this is to imitate what the receiver does and change the signal level of the pink noise for the LFE 10 dB lower. Set the volume to 0, then play the pink noise for the speakers while the level is set to -30 dBFS, and for the subwoofer change it to -40 dBFS. Then you could match everything at 75 dB. Just don't forget to change the pink noise level depending on what calibration you play and lower the volume once you're done. This is very important so you do not damage your system. To be honest, I would just stick to the default number and keep it the same for both speakers and subwoofers with the volume raised enough to have one speaker reach 75 dB. While you're doing all this, you can also set the levels for all speakers. REW won't show you Atmos speakers, so you will need to use the internal test tones. If you have done calibration, then use a video link down below. Just keep an eye out which speaker plays. Skip the speakers on screen that you don't actually have, like front wides or rear surround if you have a 5.1 system, or top middle if you have a 0.4 Atmos setup. Unfortunately, I cannot recommend using a mobile app. I tested my phone and it is not accurate with deep tones. It works surprisingly well for speaker calibration, but it is several decibels off for the subwoofers. This is how you set up the subwoofer gain properly. This will ensure the redirected bass blends in with the speakers and the LFE plays at the proper volume. But what do you do when you have more than one subwoofer? Well, you will need to level match them, but the total output stays the same. You need to lower the gain on each sub until the total SPL at the main listening position is 85 dB. This ensures the bass is not overwhelming, and having multiple subs with lower gain will also leave them with more headroom. If you have 2 subs, set each of them to 80 dB. If you have 3, set them to 77 dB individually. 4, set them to 75 dB. Play the pink noise the same way, just turn off all subwoofers and only have one turned on. Set the target level, turn the subwoofer off, turn the next one on, and repeat. Once every gain is set, the total SPL should reach 85 dB with all subwoofers turned back on. SPL summing in the real world isn't as easy. It varies depending on phase alignment, room modes, subwoofer placement, and acoustic interactions. These values are starting points, but you should always verify the final combined SPL when all subs are playing together. Now, let's cover phase and delay. This process is different depending whether your receiver has independent or linked subwoofer outputs. You can check this in your receiver setting. If your sub 1 and sub 2 have separate trim and delay controls, they are independent. If there is only one shared control, the outputs are linked. In this case, the best approach is to place all subs at equal distance from the main listening position. If you can't have all your subs placed perfectly, then you can measure the distance of the one that is farthest from you. The phase works together with delay. Think of it as the delay being a fine adjustment while the phase is a 180-degree switch. First, we are going to make sure the subwoofers are in phase and they have the best combined response. Once they are aligned, treat them as one virtual subwoofer. Then set and fine-tune the delay together relative to the speakers. If you have 2 subwoofers and you are calibrated them to 80 dB individually, see if the SPL goes up when you turn on the second subwoofer. If not, flip the phase switch on the second sub. Usually, subs on the same wall should share the same phase. If you have subs in the back, then the phase for those alone might need to be flipped 180 degrees while the front subs stay at 0. If you have 3 or more subs, group them into virtual subs, one group up front and one group in the back. Play the LFE pink noise and test each group's phase. In case of 3 subs, start with the front group. Then turn on the rear sub and switch the phase between 1 and 180 degrees to see which gives you the highest SPL. When adding more subs, the SPL should always rise. If it doesn't, the phase of the subwoofer you just turned on needs adjustment. In case of 4 subs with 2 in the back, you need to treat them as a single group and have their phase set together. Again, just make sure you reach the target level of 85 dB when playing the LFE pink noise. If each sub is level matched properly and the phase is set correctly, but the total combined output still doesn't reach 85 dB, you will need to improve summation. That means adjusting phase or delay for a second group of subs, and if the subwoofer have an adjustable phase control or your receiver provides independent sub outputs, correcting this is much easier. Otherwise, you need to physically move the subs. There is no exact amount to fix this since every room is different, and sometimes you simply can't move the subs. Perhaps try to move the seating position slightly forward or back. If you have to, increase the gain on each sub until the summoned SPL reaches 85 dB while keeping the individual SPL equal between them. Once all subwoofers are aligned and summing well together, we then verify the subwoofers are also in phase with the speakers. Start by making sure the speakers are set to small with an 80 Hz crossover. In REW, open the generator, select sign, then type in 80 Hz and hit play for the left and right speaker together. Turn off the rear subwoofers so only the front subs and speakers are active. While the 80 Hz tone is playing, watch the SPL reading. Flip the phase switches on the front subs from 0 to 180 degrees and compare which setting gives you the higher SPL. Keep whichever setting is stronger at the listening position. Remember how the phase was set between the speaker groups and always keep them the same way. So if the 180 degree setting for the front subs together with the main speaker was stronger than the 0, then turn the rear subs back on and flip their phase as well, keeping all subwoofers aligned like before. Usually the phase for the front subs need to be set to 0, but it's not always guaranteed. It's time to watch some movies with good LFE tracks, like the beach scene of Edge of Tomorrow, the big race in Ready Player One, or the last 30 minutes of one of the Transformers movies. At first you might find it overwhelming or maybe not enough. It really depends what you are used to. I would leave it like this for a few movies, but if you must change anything, you can test how much offset you need by changing the subwoofer trim level between -12 and -3 dB. Watch more movies, but once you find the number you're happy with, change the trim level back to -7 and offset the total SPL by adjusting the subwoofer gain again while playing the pink noise for LFE. So if you like your system with the sub trim at -9, then that is 2 dB shy of 85 dB. Set the AVR trim level to the subwoofer back to 7, then adjust your gain so the total SPL between all subwoofers settle at around 83 dB. If you like your system 2 dB hot, then set the trim level back to 7 from -5 and adjust the gain so the total SPL reaches 87. Don't forget to split the difference between multiple subs. If you land 1 dB away, you could just leave it like that and it might be easier to adjust the trim level to -8. Before I finish the video, I also want to go over a few misunderstood things. Many, if not most people, get these wrong. Let's talk about the crossover for the subwoofer, or LPF for LFE. Guys, this setting is for the low frequency effect channel. It is a dedicated channel in the sound design for the movies. It does not need to match the speaker's crossover. When you lower this crossover, unlike the speaker's crossover, this won't reroute any audio anywhere. Lowering it will simply roll off the LFE early. LFE has content up to 120 Hz, so set it to 120 in the receiver and defeat the dial in the back of the sub by setting it as high as it goes. Even for music, this is perfectly fine. Bass management is handled by the AVR and dictated by the speaker's crossover settings. That means if your subwoofer is set to 120 Hz and the speakers are set to 60 Hz, bass below 60 Hz is redirected to the subwoofer, regardless of the LPF for LFE setting. Again, that filter is only matters for the LFE content, and it doesn't mean your speaker and the subwoofer will play music together above the speaker's crossover all the way up to 120 Hz. If you set the low pass filter dial in the back of the subwoofer to match the speaker crossover, you will alter the filter slope overlap, effectively doubling the roll-off. The only time you need to touch the LPF knob behind the subwoofers if you don't use the sub out behind the receiver. Instead, if you use the speaker level line, or if your stereo receiver does not have a sub out and you feed the full bandwidth signal to the sub. Already ran calibration. Should you adjust the levels? Yes, you can level match the subwoofers before the calibration, and you should always readjust them after. Calibration runs test sweeps and determines levels, then applies EQ or target curves. This will alter how loud the speakers and subwoofers sound. Even if you manually add one or more PEQs to your sub, you will need to recalibrate it. I guarantee it, the level will shift, especially if the PEQ is aggressive. always reset the subwoofer trim to -7 dB and adjust the gains again, even if your calibration is set to -2, -4, or even worse into the positive range. Just don't forget that you can't use the internal test tones for this. Some calibration will lock the trim levels. In this case, you can offset it using the quick settings. This won't harm bass management, it simply changes how the sub's processing gain is applied. Double bass or LFE+Main is another common mistake where people think this will send extra bass to the main speakers. You cannot get LFE on the main speakers unless you set the subwoofer to off in the receiver's settings. That is the only time the receiver will reroute the LFE. Your main speakers will then be locked to full bandwidth. Double bass or LFE+Main is basically sending a second set of signals to the subwoofer from the main speakers. This is used for 2-channel PCM content where there is no LFE present. You can also send low frequencies from the mains to the subwoofer if you defeat the speaker crossover by setting them to large, aka full bandwidth. With this setting, you can still send audio as if the crossover was still on. For movies, turn this off. Another mistake people try is to lower the speakers crossover to fix a null. Again, the speakers do not get LFE. So lowering the main speaker crossover to 60 Hz from 80 because the subwoofer has a null at 60 or 70 Hz won't achieve much. The subwoofer is a lot more powerful and louder by design. You're also taking a lot of power away from the receiver. Another mistake people making is setting the speakers too large. Even if you have a physically large speakers, you should still set them to small. Once you set them to small, you can select the crossover. 80 Hz is totally fine, and there is no need to set them any lower unless if you want to introduce distortion at higher volume and put more stress on the receiver trying to feed enough power to your speakers. The lower you put the crossover, the more power the speakers need. That is why you have a power subwoofer. Its job is to play low frequencies without stressing the receiver. I have separate amp for my LCR feeding 140 watt per channel. I have tested my system with speakers set to full bandwidth and with crossover set to 80 Hz, and I heard zero difference. The subwoofer and the LFE is so much louder than the front towers. So even if your towers are capable of playing down to 40 Hz, you can leave the crossover at 80 Hz. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but you can easily test this yourself. If you turn off the subwoofers, behind the subwoofer, turn off the switch, you will hear a nice difference between setting the crossover for the speakers to 40 Hz or 80 Hz. As soon as the subwoofers are turned back on, I guarantee you won't hear any difference between those crossover settings. Again, all you're doing is putting more strain on the receiver while risking clipping, distortion, and reduced dynamics. Also, I want to cover one of the biggest issues when mixing two different subwoofers. There are two types of subwoofers, bass reflex and seal. Bass reflex subs can have port or a passive radiators. These behave very similarly. Around their tuning frequency, they have a 180-degree phase rotation and the roll-off is at a steeper 24 per dB octave rate. Seal subs have a 90-degree phase rotation and a gentler 12 dB per octave roll-off. These differences make it harder to blend bass reflex and seal subs. But ported subs and those with passive radiators can be paired pretty well without too much issue. Can you make it work? Probably. I had good luck mixing a 12-inch sealed SVS with a small 8-inch ported Yamaha that I used for near-field LFE. I had zero issues. Probably because their tuning frequency was far apart, or maybe I was just lucky with their phase alignment or had them at a good location. Another issue when you level match a powerful subwoofer with a smaller one is that you reduce the stronger subwoofer's output to match the weaker one in the shared frequency range. Pink noise typically covers 30 to 80 Hz, which both subs can play. You lower both subs' gain to reach the target SPL number. But below the smaller sub's roll-off point, only the large sub is working. That entire lower range ends up several decibels quieter than it could be because its gain was reduced just to match the weaker sub at higher frequencies. In other words, you are not taking full advantage of the bigger sub's deep bass capabilities. Other options are either to deal with the big sub being 5 dB lower under 30 Hz since the small sub cannot help in that range, or raise the big subwoofer a little and lower the small sub even more, which might result in a slightly uneven sound. For example, calibrating the big subwoofer to 83 dB instead of 80 and the small sub at 78. Double check the total SPL to be on the target. Final option is to run the big sub at 85 dB and the small one at 80 dB. You can also try running it like this. You might get more than 85 dB, but you can also lower the trim level to -9 or 10 or 11. I also would like to quickly mention subwoofer locations. We all work with whatever we have. Some have dedicated home theater rooms with square or rectangle shapes. Others deal with open floor plans, big hallways, and limited placement options due to furniture. A specific setup that works great for one person might not work at all for someone else. Generally, the standard recommendation is to place subwoofers across opposite corners or along opposite walls, in a simple square or rectangular room that's closed. And if symmetry is not a concern, you can try one sub up front and one in the opposite rear corner. Another option is midpoints of opposing wall, but keep in mind that is the least efficient way to do it and usually requires twice the power to hit the same SPL. You can also try both subs up front or both in the rear corners, or place them 1/4 away from the front or back wall. But for open or non-sealed rooms, placement becomes more complicated. For example, I have an open floor plan with my theater in one half in a larger room, and there is a hallway directly across from my back left subwoofer position. Based on typical advice, people would tell me not to put both subs up front. However, after measuring all realistic placement, having both subs next to my main tower still gives me a very even bass in the listening position. I do get a small cancellation around 80 Hz, but that can be minimized with a narrow PEQ on one sub. What you achieve with this is you still get an overall SPL that is higher, even though one subwoofer plays a little bit less at that frequency. In any case, having my rear sub facing the hallway caused a massive null at 40 Hz. Personally, I would much rather deal with a small 5 to 10 dB dip at 80 Hz than a dip that is 20 to 30 dB at 40 Hz. Also, subwoofer crawl is a good starting point, but it's far from perfect. Otherwise, we would all put our subs in our bathrooms. You could get a bloated or muddy bass. The most reliable way to determine the ideal placement is to measure each options and choose the location that gives you the best frequency response. The last thing I want to answer is a question: do I need multiple subwoofers and how does it help? The short answer is yes. Having 2 or 4 subwoofers improves the seat-to-seat frequency response, reducing the effects of room modes and standing waves. The result is smoother, more even, and more enveloping bass that just simply sounds better for everyone in the room. It also provides additional headroom since each subwoofer works less hard, helping avoiding clipping, distortion even at higher playback levels. Already made it clear in this guide that we do not add more subwoofers to get more SPL or to shake the neighbor's house. When moving to dual subwoofer setup and working with a tight budget, it is often better to go with 2 smaller subs rather than a larger one. Within reason, of course. 2 10-inch subs won't outperform a single 16 or 18-inch, but I will still take a pair of good 10-inch subwoofer over a single 12, or 2 16-inch subwoofer over a single 18. The goal is smoother coverage and better balance across the room. Well, I hope this helped clarify things. If you got a question, drop a comment down below and share this with someone who's confused about the gain and crossover setting. If the video helped you out, please like this video. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.